Hello folks, I'm Cooper, and today on Cooking with Cleavers we're talking about my setup for whetstones and sharpening knives. So here before you can see I have a whetstone. This is a Suhiro Syrax 1000. If you're not familiar with whetstones, a whetstone is simply a stone. Really, this is an artificial stone that's manufactured of an abrasive material to sharpen a knife against. You'll put your knife on it and sharpen along it. So here you can see my setup. I have a silicone dog or cat food type thingamajigad with an edge on it because as you're using a whetstone for sharpening, you will be dealing with a lot of water. As you're going along, it's also handy to have a convenient water delivery system like this. I think it's like a ketchup bottle from like a restaurant or whatever, to put more water on your stone as you're working with it. And so there'll be water all around when you're working with any type of water usage sharpening stone. Over here you can see a Tupperware with water in it. For most sharpening, they'd call this a pond. You can get very expensive ones from whetstone companies, or you can do what I did and get a large plastic Tupperware or storage container type thing, and that works perfectly fine. Also, I have a rust eraser is what they're called. I'll put a link down below, but this is sabitoru, which is translates directly from Japanese into rust taking or pulling, toru, to take. The use of this is to clean your whetstones. As you're using a whetstone, there will often be buildup on said whetstone, like this gray matter here. That's steel from the knives that's gotten into the stone to market. You can use the sabitoru to clean off your whetstone. I'm not going to really mess with it right now, but that's just a basic example of it. Whetstones, what do you need to look for in a whetstone? I have multiple different whetstones here. There are two general types of water using whetstones. There are also oil using whetstones, but you probably don't want to deal with them. They're more inconvenient and messy. So you're probably going to use a whetstone that's a water-based whetstone for your sharpening. And you need to know a couple of things before you get into choosing a whetstone. The things you need to know are the grit rating and whether it is a soaking stone or a splash and go stone. So first we'll talk about grit. Grit is the rating of abrasive materials. So like on sandpaper, as well as these whetstones, there is a grit rating. As you can see on this stone, it has a number on it. This is the 6,000 grit, and this is a 1,000 grit. This stone itself is the King KDS 1000 6000 combination stone. So it has two stones put together, one of 1,000 grit and one of 6,000 grit. So for grit, you need to know that the lower the number, the more abrasive or more rough the whetstone is. If you want to go experiment with this in a convenient way, go to your local hardware store and go touch like a 100 grit piece of sandpaper, and it'll be incredibly rough, and if you put enough pressure, it could very quickly rub through your skin and make you start bleeding. Then go over and touch their highest grit. So if you're in like a wood section, that might be 1,000 or something, I don't know. You can get like up to 6,000 10,000 grit sandpapers too, usually in like an automotive section. But go touch the sandpaper with the highest number grit, and you'll notice that it's incredibly smooth and doesn't feel rough at all. If you were to take that 100 grit sandpaper and go sand on a 2x4, you would sand through the 2x4 relatively quickly. If you use like a 6,000 grit sandpaper on a 2x4, it would take forever to smooth off edges or sand through it because the abrasiveness is so fine. For knives and whetstones, there are three general categories for grits. There are coarse whetstones, which are grits below like 800 grit. There are medium grits, which are like 8,000 to 2,000 or 8,000 to 3,000 depending. And then there are polishing stones, which are higher grits than that. The polishing grits can be between like 3,000 and go up to 20,000 or so depending. It also depends on the company, but typically a polishing stone you'd get around like 5,000 to 6,000 grit as a good starting level for a polishing stone, and a 1,000 grit as a good medium grit sharpening stone area. So most people don't need a coarse grit because that's for dealing with like super heavy damage to a blade, not for your normal sharpening. So I recommend that you get a 1,000 grit whetstone. For sharpening a Chinese slicing cleaver in particular, you probably do not need a polishing stone in most cases because it's the 1,000 grit stone that'll get you to the sharpening edge. Typically a polishing stone is more of benefit for making a really refined edge, but on more high-end steels and harder blades. Generally speaking, a Chinese slicing cleaver is not the highest end of steel and is usually not super hard. So there is less benefit from a polishing stone of really high grit. So you can just get a 1,000 grit stone. One option for that is the King 1000 or this King 1000 6000 combination. That's a good option for about $40 for the combination stone on Amazon. It's not the best option, but it's probably the most budget friendly of the good options. The option that I recommend for most people is to get the Syrax 1000, which is a soaking stone. That King is also a soaking stone. But the Syrax 1000 stone is just a 1,000 grit stone, and it is very nice for feedback as you're sharpening, and it's a relatively clean stone and a good speed of sharpening stone. It costs about $40 on Amazon. For the sharpening stones, you generally have to leave them in the water for about 15 to 30 minutes before you start sharpening your knives. So I'm actually going to put this back in the pond because after this I'm going to make a video on knife sharpening, or on actually sharpening the knife rather than just the tools of the trade. I also have the splash and go variety of sharpening stone. You can tell if a sharpening stone or a whetstone is a soaking stone if it bubbles when you put it into water. So this is a Suhiro Syrax 1000, and you can clearly see and probably hear, we'll see if the bubbling noise picks up, but it'll bubble up for a significant period of time, probably 10 to 15 minutes or so. Certainly at least the first couple of minutes will be a rather vigorous bubbling on any soaking stone of reasonable quality. So that's how you can tell if it's a soaking stone versus a splash and go stone. Here's a splash and go stone. When I put it in, from there's basically no bubbles coming off of it because water is not displacing air inside of that stone. Any bubbles that are on it right now are simply air that was trapped to it as I put it into the water. The Splash and Goes, I have the Naniwa Pro 800 and the Naniwa Pro 3000. These two stones I got from Perfection, which is a knife sharpening YouTube channel. He has a store, a website store, and I got these from that store because they're a lot cheaper way to test this particular stone type. So typically speaking, the Naniwa Pro 800 and the Naniwa Pro 3000 will sell for a single stone will be $80 to $100 a piece. I got the set of these two from Perfection for $66 or thereabouts. The difference is the stones I got from him are significantly smaller, thinner, and less wide, so they're not as long, wide, or thick as the normal Naniwa Pro stones, but I didn't want to spend $200 to figure out whether or not I liked the stones. $60 was a nice way to test it out, and they're good stones, but I don't think they're worth such a high cost when you can get a Suhiro Syrax 1000 for $40, spending $80 to $100 for a Kyocera or Naniwa Pro 800 is a bit pricey in my book. The 800 in this lineup is their mid-range grit or middle grit sharpening grit, and the 3000 here is their polishing grit. They're very good whetstones, but extremely expensive. I have another stone, which is the Suhiro Rika 5000 stone. It is a very nice polishing stone that costs between $40 and $50 on Amazon. Made by the same company as the Suhiro Syrax 1000. This is the Suhiro Rika 5000. It is also a soaking stone, so you have to soak it in water before use. One thing to note, I don't appreciate having fixed bases on my whetstones. This has a plastic base that is affixed to the sharpening stone, so there's no way to, without ruining the base or the stone, remove the stone from said base. I prefer to have a stand-alone stone like this Suhiro Syrax 1000. It doesn't have anything glued to it. It comes with a rubber ring thing to put it in, so if you're sharpening on your countertop or whatever, it doesn't slide around. But avoid whetstones that have permanently affixed bases. If they ship a base with it, that's fine. Oftentimes that'll be from cheaper companies if they ship like a wood or bamboo base. Suhiro is a nice company, but on this particular model I ended up with a plastic base. I didn't choose the right option to have it come baseless. But there's whetstones. We talked about grit, we talked about splash and go versus soaking. All of these options are good options. If I were to pair them up for uses, the Suhiros here this would be a great mid-range sharpening stone with the Rika 5000 here as a good polishing stone, but you don't necessarily need a polishing stone. The King KDS 1000 6000 combination stone is the best budget option to get both a sharpening stone at the 1000 and a polishing stone at the 6000. Again, you can just get the 1000 grit stone and that would serve you perfectly fine. And then the Naniwa Pros are the far more expensive option, but they're splash and go, so it saves you time if you are a person who likes to be able to sharpen at the ready. Another piece of kit to add to a good addition to your sharpening lineup would be a leather strop. I have here a buffalo leather strop. This I also got from Perfection, but you can get leather strops on Amazon at reasonable prices and probably reasonable quality levels. Again, this one's buffalo hide, but you can get it with equine, so horse hide or normal cow hide. Other things to note in a sharpening setup, I like to have a ruler and a calculator to help me figure out where to hold a knife, at least the first time or two sharpening said knife. Often Chinese slicing cleavers will come with an edge that's not very good, and you need to put your own edge on it. The way you determine the edge on the angle that you're going to put on the edge is how high of an angle you hold the knife off of the whetstone. Determining that is sometimes a bit of a challenge. An easy way to do it is to determine which angle you want. I generally like a 15-degree angle on my knives. You can then take a ruler, measure out how high of a blade you have. So here I have like a 92 millimeter blade, or 9.2 centimeters. And then the way to get the height that you have to hold the stem of the blade, or the spine of the blade, off of the whetstone, this angle. What you can do is use a calculator and put in, so I have a 9.2 centimeter height. I multiply that by sine of 15, and that gets me how high I need to hold my blade off of the whetstone. So I need to hold my blades, the spine of my blade, 2.38 centimeters off of the whetstone to get a perfect 15-degree angle. So you can use a ruler and figure out exactly where that looks like. And for sharpening, you don't have to be exact, obviously, but having a good starting point is useful. So that's one thing to do. Also, keep a rag around to clean up water, because it's a wet business. It's called whetstones. You will have wet stuff. Stay tuned, and I'll get a video up on actually knife sharpening video. Also, there are other knife sharpening options, like you can get electric sharpeners. There's these cheap sharpeners that are pull-through sharpeners. You basically put your knife in and pull through. I don't recommend either of those. The electric sharpeners will remove a lot of material, probably for far more than a whetstone would. And these cheap pull-through sharpeners can damage your knives even. They're very cheap and not high quality. They're not intended for good knives or for serious sharpness. They may get your knife a bit sharper, but they also have the potential to damage your knife far easier. You can also get a lot of various whetstones that are cheap. I have a few different cheaper models that I got to see how they worked. But these Japanese stones are far more enjoyable. They typically provide a bit larger size, which is easier to use with, and they have better construction and water holding capabilities, as well as sharpening capabilities, which makes it a more enjoyable experience to sharpen with these Japanese knives, or whetstones. Thank you for watching this episode of just what I use in my knife sharpening setup. I'll get another video up of actually knife sharpening. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you're interested about more whetstones, please comment in the comment section asking specific questions or whatnot. And stay tuned. Please like and subscribe, as well as hit the notification bell, and share this with friends and family who might benefit. So thank you very much.